ReReeti Foundation, in collaboration with the Piramal Museum of Art, is happy to welcome all of you to Talking Museums, preparing for a new normal. This is part of our effort to celebrate International Museum Day. Talking Museum is a series of focus groups ReReeti Foundation has organized over the last few weeks. These discussions were designed to document the impact of the current COVID-19 crisis on museums, discuss ways to overcome it, and build a collective platform for the museum sector to come together. If you would like to be part of these discussions, please write to us at info@rereeti.org. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. Today's webinar is for 90 minutes. You can post your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. Please mention the name of the panelist you are directing it to. We will try to keep the last 30 minutes for audience questions. This session is being recorded and we will send you the link of the recording next week. So let's begin. I would like to welcome our panel for today. First, we have Ashwin Rajgopalan, Director of the Piramal Art Foundation. Under Ashwin's leadership, the foundation runs important fine arts exhibition at the Piramal Museum of Art, supports art management programs, archives and digitalization of materials in artist studios, and runs one of the largest libraries dedicated to books and documents of modern and contemporary art. Next, we have Karni Singh Jasol, Director, Mehrangarh Museum, Jodhpur. Karni is a Fulbright and Charles Wallace Fellow. He has curated several international exhibitions, which include Peacock in the Desert, the Royal Arts of Jodhpur, and co-curated the much acclaimed Garden and Cosmos, the Royal Paintings of Jodhpur, to name just a few. Karni is currently working on the Reimagining Mehrangarh project, a design and infrastructure master plan for the museum. Finally, we have Dr. Janvi Falke, Director of Science Gallery, Bangalore. Dr. Janvi is a filmmaker and historian of science and technology. She is the founding director of the Science Gallery and visiting professor of the National Institute of Advanced Studies. She has worked as an external curator to the Science Museum London and was scholar in residence at the Deutsche Museum Munich. Unfortunately, Victor Hugo Gomez, the director of the Goa Chitra Museum, will not be able to join us today. Thank you for joining us today and welcome again. To begin, let's talk about some of the operational challenges during the early days of the COVID crisis. How were the first 2 weeks of the lockdown? When did you see it coming? What were the first things you put in place? What were your biggest challenges and how did you go about making difficult decisions? Ashwin, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you. And it's a pleasure joining all of you today here on this panel. So I suppose getting ready for this lockdown was pretty much in coordination with the rest of the country. We were all given our, be prepared for a lockdown drill, and then we went into lockdown. So I suppose in that sense, everything was left where it was, and we all got shut into our homes. And we're still trying to figure out how we do physical checks of objects. We're still, we're just hoping that certain things that are hanging in certain places are still there, because we even overall manpower in our facilities, in our locations has come to literally, if at all, one security guard. So everything was kind of just left where it was. And we've been picking up our pieces over time. even working from home isn't that easy because a lot of our work we do are on hard disks and servers that sit at work, and they sit there because they're secure. And so, it's not easy to access them from home and suddenly start to work. So yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting journey. I don't think we were really very prepared for it, so to say. But right now we're trying to figure out how to get back into it, right? I think it's been long enough, and now certain alarm bells are going to start ringing in terms of conservation and care and, just doing physical checks. So that's where we are at the moment.
Karni, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Tejasvi, and lovely to be here this afternoon. We got some indication from the Janta curfew announcement, and there have been several discussions in our institution. I mean, we are a historic fort, spread in 26 acres, and handling about over 11 million visitors annually. There is a sort of a disaster management manual in place, and immediately some forecast was put in place as to how long this period is going to be. We all knew that Janta lockdown was a test case by the Prime Minister, and we were heading towards a lockdown situation. Of course, we didn't anticipate how long it was going to be, but certainly we had a sense that it is going to be a lockdown situation. Fortunately, in our site, I live on the site, so the curator and director's residence is on the premises, along with residential space for other staff members. So we put down a lockdown team together and put in a protocol in place, which periodically takes into account the care and maintenance of the collection, both in the gallery and also in the reserve. And we slowly sort of, updating. No one is prepared for such a long lockdown. But I'm happy to report that, the collection is in very good shape and being looked after very well.
Thank you, Karni. Janvi, yours is a slightly different situation. So how was it for you? You have to
yes, I did unmute myself. Yes. So, like my colleagues, we sort of, I think the 1 day curfew was a precursor to the lockdown. We were just emerging from the last sort of exhibition that we had, which was our, in fact, first major exhibition, and we were just kind of wrapping up when this befell. But like you rightly said, we are in a different situation for two reasons. One is because we are very new, we are under construction. Our building is under construction and we are in the making. But the other aspect of our work is that we have no collections and we will never have collections, which takes a huge burden off our heads, right? I mean, which we just spoke about. How do you take care of objects during a lockdown, right? I mean, it's what do you do with objects that require conservation? In fact, a colleague of mine in Germany who I spoke with before I took this job, and he works in a museum, and when I told him this is the kind of work I'll be doing, he was like, "Oh, I envy you because you work in an institution where you can use objects up, unlike having to keep them and conserve them forever, right? Which is a very different concern from actually having to conserve. So how to keep objects constantly interesting and versus how to keep them, for future generations. So we are in that lucky situation where we don't have to worry about what's happening at site because they're basically offices. But on the other hand, of course, our construction is on hold. And even with the slow resumption of activities, because of the precarious situation of labor and, labor policies being under flux, what we find now is that we're faced with a certain kind of uncertainty as to whether we'll have a reasonable amount of workforce. Of course, we can't have full workforce anyway for social distancing measures. So that's a concern which will slow down the project, which leads to all sorts of other things that my colleagues will identify with very easily, like escalation of costs and whatnot. So that's something we're contending with. But the other thing is also material supplies, right? Those chains are now weakened, and so to have reasonably strong supply of steel, for example, to the site or other construction materials is not something we can any longer take for granted. And so that's something that has to be worked out. So we are dealing with site issues or concerns in a very different way to my colleagues. Hard disks are sitting at our workplace. They're safe, but we need access to them, and we weren't able to get them out. I think the biggest concern after construction on our minds right now is what now, right? Where do we go from here, and what does this do to our programming? Because there we share something very similar with my colleagues on the panel, which is that our exhibitions are physical, right? Like, and they have objects and they have installations and they have programming. What happens now? So I think that's the bigger worry, and that's where our rethinking is now happening.
Thank you. Jumping to our next question, let's move to our immediate future now, reopening our museums, where everybody is in the process of thinking and strategizing how do we open our museums. Could you take us through the process of how you plan to reopen each of your spaces? Karni, why don't we start with you this time?
Yes. We have considered two scenarios. We don't see visitors coming into our spaces for a long time. I think the first people joining in would be our staff in the first few months. So we put in a protocol in place for the staff to come in, and that includes a protocol and practices right from, in fact, before they leave home to coming on the premises, and when they are on premises, several steps which include social distancing and hygiene. The next step is, of course, when visitors do come to the site, and then there is a SOP for the visitors, which includes all the touch points and how one can mitigate risk at all those touch points, from parking to ticketing to entering to physically being in the gallery space, to visiting our retail, F&B, and to exiting. So all those touch points have been identified. So one major change, of course, that's going to be happening because of social distancing is number of people in your site. So we have been calculating our maximum capacity at each of the locations, and then working backwards and creating optimum number of visitors per slot. And we are working with two tech companies to see and develop an online ticketing system, which is going to be more like how you book a movie ticket. So show and slot. And that would determine only X number of visitors in that slot.
Janvi, how do you plan to come back? I remember you were planning for your next exhibition, though it's at the very initial stages.
Yeah.
How are you seeing coming back to it? Would it be the same, or what are the differences in scenario now?
Yes. So we were planning on two exhibitions this year. We were planning on one small one for about 10 days and another one which would have been about 45 to 50 days. And we've decided to go entirely online for the small exhibition, the 10-day exhibition, because it's going to happen sometime in late July, early August. And we decided it would be it's too early, and it would be perhaps irresponsible to just simply open up. And for that, we would require, given that our own building is under construction, we would be renting space from elsewhere, which would then require working with someone else. And we simply don't have the luxury right now to put or to negotiate the kind of conditions that would be ideal, the kind of conditions that Kani just spoke about, which are absolutely essential, I think, for the next anything between 1 to 4 years, depending on who you're listening to. So if that is required, then it is perhaps best that we do this, the first small exhibition online anyway. For the December exhibition, we are still in two minds whether we might actually have partially the exhibition happening online and the other half happening in a physical space, because we have more time to negotiate the kind of conditions that would be required to deliver something like that. So we are, yeah, so those are the conditions, those are the decisions we've taken on the exhibitions. Construction, of course, as I said, will slowly kind of continue. And that is also a sort of a reopening for us of activities. But for my team, I think one of the key decisions we took, and we are a small team, of course, compared to most places, simply because, we are in the starting phase. We hope to, and we will continue to work from home for as long as it's absolutely, possible. So we plan on not physically assembling in a single space unless it is absolutely essential. And in that manner, hope to kind of ensure the safety of everyone possible, and minimize risks. And it's a privilege to be able to do that, because many of us will not be able to do that.
Thank you. Ashwin?
So yeah, we've been assessing, evaluating the whole situation, and inherently a museum is a space where there is physical interaction with a physical object, right? So we're not very sure that the digital is the answer to solving that problem. And we do understand that there is a responsibility to keep our audience engaged. I think that's why everybody is doing these online activities and exhibitions, is that you need to assume that there is a demand for cultural consumption. So we want to keep that available and flowing in some other platform. But we're not sure if switching to that platform for the long run, or to build it to the level of matching physical experiences makes any sense. So what we have done is we've actually slowed down. It's actually confusing the hell out of my teams, because on one end I'm telling them I want to see engagement online. We need to keep doing things. People should know we're alive. This is the greatest moment to create engagement, like with followers on Instagram, with newsletters, with, people have time to actually read things now, or even attend webinars. Like, think about it. It says there's 65 participants, but we had to take like a month to plan for 65 people to physically come for a talk at our museum, right? If we got 40 people, we'll celebrate. If we got 100 people, we'll be talking about it for the next year, So when that's the case, we're trying to say, let's slow down. Let's see where this is going, because there is no end game. I don't think anybody has an idea, or rather a concrete plan to figure out, this is what we can do. So for the moment, we have taken one decision, which is whatever we're going to do on the digital space has to be operational for the rest of our lives. Like, it's not something that's going to, work for 2 years or a year, and then we pack that up and then switch to a physical format. So we're looking at very interactive ideas for dealing with our collection, which anyway is an exercise we should have done, right? Like, most museums, I think, are also catching up at this time to take your collection digital, to make sure that you've done all the, house cleaning of all your online archives and stuff like that. So I think we're just going to be focusing on that at the moment, and not very sure actually where or when that conversion back to physical and stuff. So yeah, so we're right now exploring, listening, and participating, collaborating quite a bit with lots of other people, so that to see collectively where we can come up with some kind of a direction.
So you're using technology to digitalize your collection. At least that's for the next, that aspect of technology is what you will take forward
Yes.
in the next few years. Karni, what about you? What aspect of technology do you see, or what role will technology play on your sites?
Yeah, I agree with Ashwin that, visiting a museum and interfacing in art is a very personal experience. And, we have to be very careful that, how much interface there is of technology. I also agree that, museums should take this opportunity to do things which they have not done. There are hardly very select museums in India whose collections are online. And I think this is an opportunity where museums are about accessibility, right? And bringing your collections and exhibitions accessible to public is one of the important role that museums play. And I think we should take that opportunity to fill in those gaps that are in place. And yes, it is about engagement with your community, and technology, I think, will play a very important role in keeping that connect between the audience and the museum.
Okay. So you are also in the process of digitalizing your collection?
We were already in the process of digitizing our collection. A large majority of it is already digitized. And I think we'll speed up putting it online.
Janvi, what about you? Because you are immersed in technology, so how do you see it? You see it differently. So where is it placed in the larger scheme of your plan?
Sure. So I think there are some convergence. There's some convergence and there's some divergence. So I think I absolutely agree with both Arvind and Kandi that the online engagement or digital initiatives are not substitutes for the real experience, right? Because these are very personal connections that people make, experiences that people generate by actually witnessing an installation or an object or a piece of art or a scientific object, be as it may be, right? In India, we have by and far science centers rather than science museums. So it's very difficult to bring up an example. That would compare very well with the kind of collections both Arvind and Karni have. But even so, having said that, and also keeping in mind that we aren't a museum of that kind ourselves, there is still absolutely no substitute for real engagement, right? Because it's experience in space and time is something different altogether. So while we cannot imagine that this will entirely sort of, that technology will in a way become the norm, and that the physical somehow recedes, where there are these dreams of digitizing your collections, putting them up online, and then keeping them in storages like very far away where people can't access them anymore, and the digital becomes the predominant experience. I think most of us would resist that, including for ourselves who don't even maintain a collection. So what does technology then do for us? And I think here is where, again, here's where we are different, and the difference also arises from the nature of the institution we are, which is that we don't have the responsibility of digitizing a collection in order to make it accessible, right? So the digital for us opens up a different kind of door in order to consider what is that, the question which Kani just very, very beautifully put, which is how do we create that connect with our audience, where then technology becomes a tool or a medium, and then to what extent can we understand the medium to make the most of it, right? So to not offer it as a substitute, but something, as Arvind very rightly said, something that stays, right? So we would also like to develop tools that stay with us, rather than tools that are stopgap, rather than tools that we invest in right now. And so in the discussions with my team, one of the things that came up quite strongly was it should be reusable. Right? So it's not something that's a one-off that you put online, but it's a platform rather than a one-off thing. And again, there are various technologies that are available for us to start off already. And the fact that we are here and 65 odd people are listening to us, who knows why, but is already so there is a basis upon which we can build this kind of engagement. And how can it be made better and better so that our objects, our installations, our instruments might not be visible, but a range of things around them, which can which could be storage, which could be research, which could be histories, whatever, things that allow you to make sense, right, and create a sense of anticipation about what the real thing might look like, are the kind of things we can do in the meanwhile, right? And so we see technology in fact playing a huge role. Also for imagining things, and that's again where the fact that we are not connected to objects and have the responsibility in a way to bring artists, scientists, scholars from the humanities together. For us, technology also plays that kind of a role, right? So the very format of engagement in itself could be, and this is not, again, not new. We've seen this. Could be a work of research, or could be a work of art.
Okay. Thank you. Very different ways of looking at and using technology. This is a very pressing question which all of us are grappling with. We will have low ticket sales, no big events, dip in the cafe and museum stores, probably lower donations, corporate contributions, and endowments. This is our reality for at least the next 6 months or 2 years also. How are each of you planning on addressing these revenue and income shortfalls? And what are the different ways you're looking at becoming financially sustainable? Ashwin, would you like to go first?
So just to give you a background, so we are not a ticketed museum. What that means is we've been privately funded. It's a philanthropic engagement by our patrons. But that said, it's a corporate and the pressures are on, as you said, even donations and support is going to come down. So what we didn't have to rely on ticket sales, we had to rely on in terms of budgets and fund allocations plus. So we have taken this decision. It's not something that we were told to do as a museum, but we said, for the last 4 years, we've had it good. We've been, indulging in the kind of exhibitions that we wanted to do. But now we've said we need to look at revenue. And the reason for looking at revenue is not only for our own sustenance as a museum, but it creates kind of an inflow to all the people we work with. So whether we're doing panels, how do we share revenue? How do you ticket things now? How do you get fractional support from the participants? Because people are willing to pay 10 rupees to 50 rupees for museum tickets. That museum ticket expense isn't there anymore, so to say, right? Like you're not, if you're not walking into a museum and buying a ticket, but that money is still there, right? So, if a museum was getting 2,000 people a day, but now can only accommodate 200, how do you get the remaining 1,800 people to spend that 50 rupees with you? So we're thinking of things like that. We're thinking of how revenue is going to be central. What all can you monetize, right? Basically things like YouTube, people know you can monetize, but that's a complicated set of content that you need to have and then spend money to market that. But how do you monetize other aspects of your museum? And then we're also looking at how to extract value from our own teams, right? Okay, teams had a certain workload, a certain contract, and they're supposed to do something, for whatever they cost the company. But how do we extract value from them, which also then turns around to creating more output, so therefore more revenue, or at least it kind of gets balanced for instead of spending something with a consultant or with an external agency, right? So we're trying to look at such ways, but it is something that we've suddenly started looking at revenue being important and very central to our functioning, right? So even though it's not ticket sales, it has to come in from somewhere, and we are working our way through
that. Karni?
Yeah, for a museum like ours, the revenue stream is primarily from visitors. As I mentioned, the museum gets more than 1 million visitors. The visitor services like the museum shop and cafe and the ticket, that forms the substantial part of our revenue stream. In fact, it's quite funny that in early March when we were working on next year's budget, one of the things that we were discussing is that this 11 lakh number was proving to be very difficult for us operationally, and we were thinking of ways in which we can regulate this traffic because it was compromising the visitor experience. And so quickly it turned that from 11 lakh visitors, we've come down to almost sort of zero for the past few months. So I think that speaks about the fragility of life. But having said that, sorry for digressing. Yes, we have to reinvent ways in which our revenue stream is sort of substituted by other revenue stream other than just the visitor numbers. And some of the areas that we are looking at is that, I mean, we have location as to our advantage. It's a historic fort with large spaces. It used to have events, and events was one of the streams of revenue that we were having. But I think that could be sort of, when things open up, that could be further enhanced. The other area that we are looking at is consultancy. So we've been an operational museum for more than 30 years now, with highly professional staff in conservation, in curation, in heritage management. So some of those skills could be outsourced to private projects, and the museum could actually get into a consultancy business, something that we have not done in the past. Probably, developing paid content. Remember that vast majority of school children who are currently doing online classes in week or two will have their summer break. There won't be any parks, there won't be any malls, no cinema, theaters. Parents would be looking at ways in which they are creatively engaging their children. And if museums develop paid content online in the form of lectures or classes, that is another important revenue source. Retail was our strong revenue source, and there is already an online presence of our retail store, but I think it needs to further enhance the quality of interface for online shopping. We had several F&B outlets which also contributed towards the revenue, and with less visitors, that potential would not be fully used. So probably we are looking at our F&B department actually sustaining itself by developing a home delivery service or private catering. So what we're looking at is looking at the strengths of each department and how that each department can sustain itself by doing activities and supporting in times when there won't be any visitors.
Thank you for taking us through the different departments and how you're working within each one. Janvi, you will, is there an impact on the donations and the funding, or does it remain the same? And if there's a difference, how do you manage, how are you planning to bridge the gap?
Yeah. So again, sort of, the early stages of being established. It's of course it's precarious, but the burdens are not as huge as compared to an established museum, right? Where you have large teams, but you also have, the running expense of actually, conservation and preservation and range of such responsibilities, but also departments that you've created which have to now survive through this period of difficulty, right? So we are in that sense at this moment in a lucky situation that we don't have a massive institution to in a sense carry through this difficult time. So the construction is the key thing. I think for this year we are fine, but obviously we were going to fundraise this year, and we will still. And it's a disastrous time to be actually wanting to do any of that at this moment. So one of the things is that that I must mention is that we are a part of an international network of galleries, right? We are 8 of us globally, and we are all university linked. We are all university based. Bangalore is the only one that's an independent standalone gallery, but it's university linked. So we have 3 academic partners. And so what that does for our sister galleries, for example, is that their budgets in a sense get absorbed and supported and carried over through the university. So it's a part of a larger enterprise, and it gets papered over through that. For us, it's a little more precarious because we are independent, and moreover, our academic partners aren't the ones who are funding us. So that creates a certain kind of a situation for us, which means we can't draw lessons from our sibling galleries, being the most obvious one. But I think one of the ways in which we are hoping to buffer up our ability to survive, say, the next 2 odd years is by raising lots of research funding. And because we are an institution for research-based public engagement, in many ways, the kind of research grants that are available allow us to then support our people, but also the outcomes of those research grants become the kind of things that we put through in our exhibition. So that's one way in which we hope to create a bridge to the other time. But I think in a very short time, we will have to still go out there and, in a sense, try to prove our value to donors, and for them to be able to see that, cultural spaces, right, are incredibly, cultural spaces, cultural institutions and public spaces are incredibly important, and that one cannot ignore this. I mean, this while, of course, I mean, given the difficult situation around us, it's very, very hard when there are people who do not have access to something as basic as food, to make an argument for a cultural institution. And it's at the same time, as much as, and I've said this before, so those of you who might have heard me say this, please forgive me. There's not much that I admire or even have good things to say about the man called Churchill, but there's a quote that's often attributed to him. I'm not even sure it's actually historically true. But apparently, during the Second World War, at some point he was approached for a funding cut for the Arts Council. And apparently his answer was, then what are we fighting for? And I think that's a good answer, and I don't care whether he actually said it or not, but I think it's an important thing to bear in mind that, we wish to survive this situation. We wish to survive and overcome the pandemic. We also wish to survive and overcome challenges like climate change and other things that are coming, and lie ahead of us. And we wish to overcome them. We wish to survive, but what do we wish to survive for, right? And I think in that space where we want a meaningful existence, cultural institutions and cultural spaces and public spaces are incredibly important. And I think we need to keep that conversation alive without kind of saying it's more important than something else, because it's not, but that this is important. And we cannot actually intellectually afford to ignore that aspect of, human life. So I'm banking on our collective ability to keep that conversation going on in the public sphere, so that, we are able to collectively, I think, keep, at least enough funding going so that the institutions do not crash and come down or have to shut down.
Yeah, I think this is a time when all cultural institutions and, organizations have come together to see how collectively we can overcome the crisis, because to depend on government aid or external aid is not the way out of the solution. We will have to go back and see what within ourselves we could, do to bring out, to stay afloat. Any advice you guys, any of you would like to give to the smaller museums who are not government funded and have, are feeding from mouth to hand kind of a situation? For them, it becomes very difficult where they don't have enough support from the government, or they don't have enough backup reserves ready with them to sustain them. How or what would you tell or suggest these smaller museums? Karni, would you like to go?
Yeah, one thing, I mean, the smaller museums comparatively, in my opinion, are slightly better off because of the small number of staff. In this period, the biggest stress on museums is the salary bill. And that way, the smaller museums have an advantage because their staff strength is low. But having said that, as you rightly said, that rather than depending on government funding and on private funding, I mean, each museum can look at its strength and work out a way in which those strengths can be monetized in this difficult time. Also, sort of have a stronger presence in the community. We are, as museums, we are in the service of society. We have served the society for all these years and times to come. And I think it's time that the society supports the museum in this difficult time. And that's why the community engagement of smaller museums or larger museum becomes very important. And I think the patrons and community in these crisis time would be happy to support museum. And in fact, when they're looking at funding strategies, local funding strategies, we are all speaking about local after the PM has said focus on local. So yes, I mean, focusing on your local community environment is important, and support from them could be an important source for them in this difficult time.
This brings me to the next question of audience engagement and how we need to kind of how we are looking at representing our or catering to the underrepresented communities. We'll have to look at completely new ways of doing this. For example, how are we going to address the issue with the visually impaired people, because for them touch was the most important way of communicating to the outside world, and with social distancing, with no touch, that is taken away from them. How are we looking at that? Do you have any ideas, or have you been working on something for addressing the minority communities within your museums? Ashwin, would you like to take that first?
Sure. So that this is a very interesting question, because if you look at our vision statement and whenever we speak about it, we use the word inclusive, and we're so like, I think all museums today wear that proudly, saying we have visually impaired access, you have, physically challenged access, and there's hearing, there's audio guides, there's, multiple languages, all of that stuff. I'm very proud of the fact that, like we have trained our immediate community to say that, I mean, you know how Bombay is, where a corporate park where the museum is, right next door is a giant slum. So we bridge that gap by saying those people can walk in, and our security on a normal day is their job is to keep them away from wandering through. Actually says, sure, come for the museum, please go inside, right? But at this point, I don't know if we can even engage with these inclusive ideas, because they're fully attached and developed for the physical space, right? As you said, yeah, I mean, however good the digital medium may be, other than say audio screen being read for people with visual impairity, I don't know how far I can take. You can't do anything with augmented reality and virtual reality. You can't, do that. So I don't know, maybe this is a tough pill to swallow. Like in times of war, certain people who are marginalized are going to probably take a harder hit at it. But I mean, we're going to try and work around it. But at a time when you don't have the ability to reach things to people, you can't go outside. It's like, they've tied your hands and feet behind your back. So I don't know, in that sense, we have also become a little impaired, or handicapped in that sense of being able to even function. So I don't know, the idea of inclusivity is on major pause at the moment, because I think we ourselves are trying to not, most of us trying not to drown in that ocean of, culture at the moment. So yeah. So we're not discussing it much at the moment.
Karni, what about at your venue?
Yeah, as Ashwin said, that's a difficult question. Our venue, being a fort, is already physically quite challenging and inaccessible. It was built to be an inaccessible place. But last few years we've been working towards creating physical accessibility, and of course those facilities are in place. The elements of touch and for visually impaired, I think probably the solution would be take the content to their centers. We had developed a Braille guidebook and certain tools, and in fact those could be handed over to the teachers, and bring the museum in the classroom till such time that we overcome the situation.
Okay. Janvi, have you been thinking about this in your next exhibition?
I think for the building, we are certainly quite alert to everything that Kani and Arvind have mentioned, and we are ensuring that we are able to, meet the requirements of those differently able. At this moment, I mean, it is a very difficult, thing. We don't quite know what's going to happen, and on top of it, I mean, digital programming, right? I mean, there's the digital divide already. So we assume, even though we aim for bilinguality in pretty much everything that we do, that's still a very, very limiting factor, right? And we are assuming a familiarity with the medium, the kind of things we might use. It's even if we went ahead and said that we will do the mainstreaming for online engagement, even that is already divisive, right? So I think it's an incredibly difficult situation, and there aren't really clear answers. And I think, as Arvind very rightly said, the question is on the anvil, really. What does inclusion mean at a time like this, and what are we going to do in order to ensure that that's taken care of? I don't have the answer. I don't have all of the answers really, but what I can say is that, like my colleagues, we are all thinking about it and trying our best.
Footfalls and huge numbers has always been one of the most important metrics for impact. Definitely in this time of social distancing and fewer footfalls, this has been affected. What do you think would the new impact matrix would look like? How are you planning to measure impact? Janvi, would you like to take this?
Yeah, so this is, having finished, having sort of behind us just 2 exhibitions in Bangalore. Of course, within the network, we have a sort of experience about 11 to 12 years. It's such a tough one, even under regular circumstances, right? Like even without the lockdown or without the fear of a pandemic, it's such a difficult thing to deal with. Because how do you assess, right? Like, my favorite phrase which I'm going to patent is that, aage darshan karke chale gaye, right? Like you get a line of, say, whatever, 40 people, they line up and they leave, right? Like, what do you know they did with what you put up there? Did they have the chance to engage? Did they have the time to engage? What did they think of it? Did it reach them? So in many ways, we haven't, or rather, I'm sure we've done it, but in a sense, we needed already, and I think I dare sort of assume on part of my colleagues as well, we've been wanting to move beyond footfall for the longest time, and many of us have made various attempts to move beyond footfall for the longest time, right? And so I think this is the opportunity to kind of take a pause and say, okay, so what is it that we can show our donors and stakeholders and other, other people who hold us, responsible and accountable for the kind of money that goes into institutions such as ours? What is it that we can show, right? And I think the ball is at this moment in our court. So in fact, I mean, I would hugely say, Tejasvi, when you said that, we should be collectively thinking of responses, I mean, your institution is one that is actually doing a lot of work in this area. It would be brilliant if you were to organize, even if not a webinar, but like a closed door thinking session between, people who just have to deal with this, as to what are the other metrics we can use, right? I mean, how do you measure, for example, depth of engagement? How do you measure impact on a long-term basis? Some museums do follow-up calls. People might not be open to follow-up calls. People might not answer those things, right? But what if for example, I mean, what can you do within the span of the visitor being in your space? What can you do after that? I think, and the Indian audience, whether we like it or, I mean, every audience is different in a sense, the German audience doesn't necessarily behave the same way as the English audience, for example. And so the Indian audience also has its own habits. And those of us, we know, right? Those of us in the fields now sort of know and have observed it for some time. What can we come up with, right? And so I do think the ball is at this moment in our court, and it would be brilliant to actually sit down and consider what is it that we wish to and can offer to our donors and stakeholders by way of, these are the metrics by which we wish to evaluate our own work, but also the experiences of our visitors, right? And I think depth of engagement is one such metric for me. How that opens up, or how that black box opens up is something we're thinking about, but we don't necessarily, again, have sort of, very, very clear answers. But I'm totally open to discussions about this, both with the wonderful people who are giving us time and are in the audience, but also my colleagues on this panel and otherwise. And of course, Tejasvi yourself. I mean, I'd love for you to take the lead on this.
We'll talk about this post the webinar. Definitely, we'll take it up. You've given me some good ideas to work on. So, Karni, do you have any inputs, or would you like to say something about this?
So, I mean, let's examine the scenario. I mean, we are in a situation where, life has changed a lot. And in time to come, essentially, it's going to be quite restrictive and quite dull. And we as art institutions can really play an important positive role. There are medical professionals, they are already talking about mental health problems during COVID times. There is going to be a large majority, as I shared earlier, of students who would be studying from home. And art is something that uplifts your spirit. It touches your emotions. It brightens up your life. It stimulates your creativity and mind. So I think museums are ideally positioned at this very critical time to play an important social role in keeping the human spirit alive. I think that would be my matrix. That if I am successful in keeping the human spirit alive through my programming, through my online content, or various things that we've discussed this afternoon, and so that essentially would be my matrix to touch that human spirit in this difficult times that we are living in.
Thank you for that insightful and interesting point, which we have made a note of, and I think it's very valid, especially in these times, and museums do play an important role in mental and social well-being. Ashwin, would you like to add anything to this?
Sure. I would like to look at impact and footfall separately. We've been doing that for a while now. Footfall is one thing that, of course, when I look at every other museum in the city, or even, for example, the one example I keep talking about to my team is the Nehru Science Center. They get 800,000 children coming in there every year. That's a bizarre number, right? So, and we're literally half a kilometer from them. I'm like, how do I get those buses to make a pit stop here? So let's keep footfall aside. That's something I think we're all fighting with. Or even if you look at people who live in Colaba, they're like, oh yeah, I went to CSMVS when I was in 11th class, and he's now like 40 years old or something. So leave that aside. That has its challenges. But when you're looking at impact, I think that's something we really are focusing on, because working in a hard city like Bombay, right? Like where people are busy, it's a vast city. Everybody is competing for that, large audience base, but still in the cultural space, a very small audience base. And we want those people to engage with us and know about us, because there's always the next big idea. There's always the great next trend, right? So if you look at, for example, like if you take Instagram and you do the top 20 arts institutions by followers, the number one is Banksy. So suddenly it throws you off. You're like, okay, here's this guy who we don't know who he is. He's not an institution, but he has more followers than, say, the Met or the MoMA or the Tate or whoever, right? So obviously the audience is engaging, with a certain identity, with something they can buy into, right? And I think that's the kind of impact that we are looking to make actually at this time. So, or bring it to an Indian context where if I catch random 10 people walking outside our museum and say, name an artist, they'll say Ravi Verma. And, or, at best they would say MF Hussain, right? I don't think or Bombay is Bombay. They'll throw you off and they may say something, equally out there, but, or rather on trend. But Ravi Verma became famous because he was in every house. His calendars were everywhere. Even after he died, he became more famous, with his posters and calendars and, ceramics and all these things. So that is impact, I believe, right? It's not Footfalls, not a number of people who patronized him or bought his artwork, because eventually he sold his printing press because he didn't have the money, right? But the impact that he made has pretty much changed the visual culture of this country, right? So everything from your movies to art is still being affected by Ravi Verma. So I think we're trying to look at impact that way, and how we can be in the ears and the face of everybody. So so my team and I, we're working towards that. We're trying to see, how do you get more followers? How do you get more community? How do you build that large community based around your vision and your idea, right? And I think if we do that, then the tickets will come in. Like, then you look at proper data. You're saying, okay, I have 100,000 followers, and if I get 10% to convert or 2% to convert, then that's that much footfall and therefore that much revenue. So, yeah, so that's how we're looking at it.
But still, partly it is numbers.
Yeah, it is numbers, of course. It's one is numbers that lead to like direct revenue, and another is that leads to this idea that's like a brand. It's like why Pepsi sponsors the IP. I don't know who's sponsoring it, but somebody's sponsoring the IP. It's not that everybody is going to go and drink Pepsi at that, but it's there. It's brand recall. It's a traditional advertising jargon, right? You have to have brand recall. You have to have what do I do on a Sunday? Do I go to a mall or a movie or a museum?
Okay. Thank you very much. And there are a whole list of questions which I would want to ask, but let's give the audience some time as well. My first question from the audience is, given the financial setbacks, what are hiring and layoffs looking like right now? I think Karni, with his army of people at the fort, I think, why don't you take that up?
Yeah, a very difficult time indeed. So certainly hiring is on a sort of pause, no new hiring. And I mean, unfortunately, you must have heard in the world around, major museums are laying off. And the hardest thing for any museum is to actually lay off their staff. And in fact, sort of not only a museum, but any organization. We are good at the moment, so there are no layoffs as of now, and we are constantly the whole situation is dynamic. It is constantly evolving, and our decisions would also be backed by how the situation pans out. But yes, no new hiring and no layoffs as of now.
And is it the same with Janvi and Ashwin?
We just literally made our last hire as I think it was the day before the lockdown that we interviewed. But yes, I mean, after that, it's a freeze. I think we'll hold back on hiring new people, but we aren't laying off any. But it's also a small team, so.
Yeah, so same thing for us. I don't want to say anything and spread panic amongst my little team, but you know how it is. So this is just generally, I mean, since it's a question from an open forum, and I assume I have to, people want to know what they're going to do for their own organizations. We're not laying anybody off. We're not downsizing at the moment. As I said, it's all day to day. This month salaries were paid. Next month they'll be paid. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what happens with this pandemic, right? I mean, I can't read that well into the situation, but I think a lot of smaller organizations do have that. So yes, I suppose as the leader of an organization, you need to swallow some very hard pills. You have to think about what you're trying to uphold. Like, do you need the vision to survive, or do you need salaries to be paid, right? Do you need to hurt 4 people to save 40 people? Do you need to think of it differently? I think it is very essential. Like, there's a lot of people who are holding on to consultants. There are a lot of people who have many departments where actually, like in our institution, suddenly, as of last week, everybody has been told they have to be a digital component of their job, right? Like, you can be whoever you want to be and whatever your role may be so far, but you need to be looking at digital. Like right now, we have two people, like my residency manager is helping us with these webinars, right? So it's not just, so roles are changing, roles will get clubbed. I think now the demand on each person is going to be higher, because for the people you can't hire, you're going to have to substitute by getting your own team to, kind of scale up their deliverables, right? So yeah, it's going to be tough, and also faced with the fact that there's no alternative, employment opportunity in the arts at the moment, right? So yeah.
So from our focus group meetings, which we've been having, we've realized that there are no layoffs as such in the museum sector, because already we were a very small team. There was not enough money to kind of hire extra people. So we always worked in smaller teams. But definitely we see pay cuts happening in some of the private institutions. Government also, there is a 10% minor payoff, whereas the private ones have 10 to 30%. The next question is, what is the role of educators and the education department of the museum at this time? Does your museum have an educational department? I would request the audience to please mention who this question is addressed to. I think Ashwin, would you like to take this? Because I know you have an education department. So if you would.
So we had an education department of 3 people prior to this, where one was focusing on audience, one was focusing on outreach, one was focusing on education with schools. Now, at the same time, we can't be doing outreach programs for education at the moment. But the funny thing is, the entire team now has the education umbrella, because everything we want to do for the next 2 years is going to focus on education. And once you've gone digital, right, that's the only, like, I don't know what is my exhibitions team going to do. We're not building exhibitions for the next 6 months. I can't. So we've moved everybody into the education umbrella, actually. And we've started a writing program. My entire team of 12, 13 people now have to write every week, send in submissions. That has gone onto a website, which is just called pmastaffwriting.com. And they're writing. So suddenly we realized we have to upskill everybody to be able to communicate better, write better, so that we can educate better, right? So essentially, yeah, we're one big education team right now.
Karni, how is it in your place?
Yeah, a similar situation. We have a small education team, and they'll all now sort of, along with the curatorial team, club into creating content for the coming days. For probably we're going to run an online course or an activity for the students.
Okay. Janvi, between your exhibitions, do you kind of have a school engagement component built in?
So, our target audience is, unlike, say, a regular museum, our target audience is the 15 to 28 age group. And given that we are a university-linked institution, education is at the core of what we do, right? So, or learning, because it's highly informal. So learning is at the core of what we do, and it's very, very important. It's a very, very important part also of our exhibition seasons. And so the learning parts will continue. So in fact, the part of what we're going to do online through the year now will be trying to find various ways of enhancing our ability to deliver that without actually having smaller workshops and masterclasses, which was the format we followed before this. And Arvind has given me a wonderful idea. I think, yes, that upskilling is absolutely critical. I really want my entire team to be able to write, yes. And so bringing that to the fore, where education or learning becomes both-ended, where the team also, in a sense, reimagines and recreates their role, but also then is able to offer better engagement to the audiences as a result of that.
Yes, I think we see an opportunity for museums and education to kind of collaborate, because in the given scenario, the boards are also looking at cutting down their portions and also looking at innovative ways of disseminating information. But the schools are also mindful of the screen time which the kids will be on, at least for the next 6 months. So while it's an interesting space to kind of explore, how we go about it is something which each museum will have to figure its own way. Next question. Are there many museums who are successful in attempting to address these challenges currently? Are these international models that we could follow? Are there particular institutions we can learn from in order to come to customize to our situation and audience? I think Ashwin was mentioning an example. Would you like to bring light to that
Um,
in our last discussion?
yeah, regarding building your audience.
Regarding international, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, so we've been looking, I mean, so we never focused on international in any major way, right? So that in our regular functioning as an institution, in fact, it's a big debate we have with our residency team about how do we deal with international audiences, international artists, you know, and people who want to kind of come in, but we've always had this, at least it's a lot of it starts with me, is about how we need to provide opportunity here regionally within our sectors first before we go out there. But now with this whole change, with what is happening, right? I think by going digital, you kind of do open it out, you know, like there's no boundary in this space, so you can't really stop anybody from coming in or engaging. But as such, we are not taking any effort uh, to reach out, because it's again two different types of I mean, they're the same sector, but two different types of functionality. Like how we function in India is very different from how international art communities or cultural sector works, right? We're aspiring to get there. I think, I mean, very simple. Everywhere, like a lot of these groups I've been part of are like, oh, Germany is given money to arts. Or, yeah, that's Germany. They have money. They, you know, they do that. But India on a regular day never had funding for the arts, right? I mean, we know that. A few years ago, whatever 600 crores got cut to 60 crores or something. Some bizarre numbers that we have for funding. So India is a different scenario, and we're staying extremely focused here. The idea of the international participation, collaboration, anything to do in that sense, it's open for all now because we're online, but there's no specific, it's changed. I mean, this idea has changed over the last few weeks. We're kind of still evolving. In fact, yes, what we spoke about earlier, 2 weeks ago, I believe, or 3 weeks ago, has dramatically changed in 3 weeks. That's how this whole thing is, you know, making us work. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Karni, the next question is for you. The new ticketing system you mentioned you were working on, modeled on the movie theater slots, sounds very interesting. Would you mind sharing some details about it? Perhaps throw light on the tech companies you would be keen to design such a system. So who were the tech companies you were involved with?
Yeah, I think if you know, you can share my email address, and you know, the gentleman can sort of, you know, write to us directly. But essentially, it's a very user-friendly interface, like how a ticketing that Insider does, or any of these online booking websites do, where I think a lot of backend is required that assesses that, you know, as soon as the slot is full, it gives you the option which are the slots that are open for you to pre-decide that you would be going at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. So that gives you that flexibility. At our end, it allows us to know how many people are coming at that particular slot, and then accordingly our systems are in place. And it is just to factor in better management of people within the site.
Tejasvi, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. The next question, people will start visiting museums as the experience cannot be replaced, but in less numbers. Do you think virtual reality or augmented reality be a promising tool for museums? Or should they look into it? Who would like to take this?
I can give you a short and simple answer. It's too expensive to even give you the most decent experience. So we're not even going to explore this.
And it's such a poor substitute that it's probably not even worth the expense, I think. Yeah. It can do other things. It can do other things. And so for itself, I think it could be explored, but not as a substitute for real experience.
It's too expensive. It will cost you a few crores to actually give you the kind of, imagine wearing a glove and trying to do something. Yeah, it's expensive. Actually, whoever has access to this or wants to reach out, MAP has the closest thing, Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore. They have the closest thing to VR, AR. They have a hologram table. You guys should explore that. They got it donated. They're lucky, but I don't think anybody can afford that table. It's phenomenal, but it's
also, I feel I know there's a lot of focus on virtual and, but I think there are other areas where museums can make the content interesting. And one such area is actually people have always been fascinated about behind the scenes of a museum. And a tour of the reserve collection or how a conservation space works. I think that is going to be far more engaging and enriching than giving a substitute for the real thing. And I think that's where especially in the Indian context, rather than paying a lot of money about creating virtual tours, to create tours within museum spaces that will excite interest and engage them at multiple levels.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Janvi, you had something to say?
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with him.
Yeah. Next question. Do you think a strong museum network and collaborations between museums can help in recovery?
Yes.
Yeah, it's 100%. I think earlier on, museums had their own audience and their agendas, and they're too busy. Now that everything has been pulled off under them, collaborations have become a breeze. Like, you have no idea the kind of stuff we're working on just because museum directors are sitting at home and have the time and bandwidth, and suddenly realize that, okay, maybe we have to look at it. So yeah, we're doing a lot of fantastic stuff. Collaboration is the way to go forward. Otherwise, you can't survive, because as it is, like, we're talking about reduction of your visitor base by 60-70%. So what are you going to do with the rest of the space or the time or the so yeah, I think collaborations are going to be fairly easy and the normal thing to do going forward.
Yeah, I think the Indian museums should seize the opportunity, because as Ashwin rightly said, Indian museums, for whatever reasons, have been busy with their institutional activities. And unlike the West, where there is a sort of intermuseum exhibitions or activities, Indian museums are hardly doing exhibitions with each other. They are sending exhibitions abroad, but no one is sending exhibitions within India. And I think this time could be utilized in developing these networks, which, when the situation comes to normal, we have friends all across, and we sort of start together and bridge those gaps.
Well, that's a new idea. I mean, not new, sorry. What I mean to say is that's a very good idea to take off from Tejasvi for yourself, to probably organize a directors forum, right, of museum directors across India. I think that would be a good place to start talking.
Yes, made a note of it. Okay. What would your advice be to fresh graduates in art history and museology who are looking for jobs What alternatives can you offer them, if not jobs, considering the financial strains? Who would like to take this?
Yeah, I think though I mean we've all made the comment that we are not hiring, but I think we should not be close to the idea of people working offsite. I mean research projects, one can outsource research projects, and you need not be physically in a museum for the time that we are in this situation, but the the individual's capacity and potential can be explored by hiring them offsite.
So while this is not, the suggestion I'm about to make is not a substitute for employment of any kind, but nonetheless, I think this is a time, as several of us have said or each of us has said in different ways through this conversation, this is a time for a pause. This is a time to reflect. This is a time to contemplate. There's time on our hands, right? And unlike when I was growing up, today there are so many wonderful courses available to access online, right? For those of you who have, I'm assuming those of you who have made it to the webinar have access to the internet on at least a semi-regular basis. Upskill, right? Take different courses, learn a lot more, learn not just about art history, but learn about art management, right? Learn about art, how art history connects to history of science, for example, right? And because that's the space we are, for example, trying to explore, and we find very few people in India do cross the tight regimes between art and science, right? And it's very hard to get the science side of people to see the value of creativity from the arts and vice versa, right? Although it's much easier to take an artist to a lab than it is to take, say, a scientist to a studio, right? That having said, I think explore these things, these unusual things, right? Because those are the things that make you incredibly valuable to a future employer. That you come with skill sets that sort of are additional to your regular art history degree, which will be good enough. But I think use the time to think, and also in a sense develop what often writers are told. And I think it's not important just for writers, but it's important for everybody. What's your voice? What's your contribution, right? What is it that drives you and therefore you can bring to the job, right? Whether you're working in a museum or in an art gallery or in a laboratory or in a university, it doesn't matter where you work, but what is it that you can bring? And I think this is a time to do that kind of thinking, to explore, which our education system seldom allows, right? This kind of, a year off is an unheard of thing for the majority of us, growing up irrespective of when. Although it's becoming slightly more possible now. So, upskill, do look at courses that you otherwise wouldn't have had access to or wouldn't have wanted to look at. Get curious about things. And that'll help going forward, because, it's valuable. It's valuable to be bringing something unique, and in a way, that's your own to the table.
And just to add a little bit to that, while the situation currently is bleak, right? It's a metaphorical sinking ship at the moment. So people are only throwing things overboard to stay afloat. But that said, all these cultural institutions are protecting and preserving objects that will outlive all of us. So which means that in the long run, this job is there. It's not going anywhere, because there has to be curators, there have to be conservators, they have to be the entire gamut of infrastructure available. So right now, not to make it sound opportunistic, but do reach out to institutions and say, hey, can I work for you? Don't worry about the payment part of it, but I'm here, I have a degree, can I work? When people are taking pay cuts and working shorter hours, you at least can get some work. We'll invite people to come and write, or, you want to come and look at our objects, you want to do things, sure, participate. When we can, you probably will be that prime candidate we rely on or would bring in to, grow. So yeah, use this opportunity to reach out to institutions and say, hey, can I help you? And help is always welcome.
Yeah, I totally agree. From experience, we totally agree on that. I think we are done with the questions from the audience, but I have one last question to all the three of you. What are your top 3 priorities for the next 6 months? Janvi, let's start with you.
Oh my God. Top 3 priorities for the next 6 months. So I think the very first priority I have is to ensure that the construction proceeds as smoothly as it can, given the kind of supply chain problems, but also labor issues that are there for all of us to see. So I think ensuring that that somehow stays afloat, not afloat, stays on track is one of my top 3 priorities. My second priority is to, as I just said to the young person who likely asked about the art history degree, I want to do that kind of work with my own team. Given that the pressure to be out there right now is not that huge, I'd like them to spend this time to upskill as well. So, learn to sort of, so, I mean, if you're a designer, please learn to write. If you're a writer, please learn a little bit about something else. So, do some of that kind of work with my team. So in a sense, learn more with my team, and I include myself in it, right? Like that I should also pick up something that I don't come to the table with. And so over the next 6 months, probably, become more familiar with each other's terrains, and therefore become a team that is able to better communicate, because now you understand the vocabulary of the designer and the writer and the comms person and the, whoever else, right? The production person, etc. So I think that would be the second of my 3 priorities, or, in no particular order. And the third is to ensure that we have done the right kind of thinking that will, that will support our fundraising efforts going forward, right? So prepare ourselves with the right kind of arguments, the right kind of materials, and the right kind of, all the back end work that is required, such that as and when that becomes real and it becomes possible, we are there, and we are ready, and we are able to say, why this work matters, why public spaces matter, why cultural institutions are, worth preserving, why are we needed, in fact, to nurture humanity in a way, right? And so to be ready for that kind of work. So those are my 3 priorities.
Okay, thank you. Karni?
Yeah, so one is to keep the community engaged in whatever ways we are doing. We have a large staff. The second priority is keep their spirits high. These are difficult times, and so there's a constant engagement with the staff that is happening. And the third priority is the collections. Currently, we have a large collection which is on display, and even larger collection which is in the reserve collection, and that those protocols for their care needs to be strengthened. We've been working on it, but with sort of a smaller team. But I think as the people start coming in, their care would also become a priority.
Okay. Karni, I would, sorry Ashwin, I just remembered. Karni, would you, how your majority of your audiences are from rural part of Rajasthan. How have you seen a difference in the digital engagement? Have you seen a new addition of audiences, or have the ones who have been coming to your fort are the ones who you see online?
Yeah, I would say our vast majority of audience is from rural parts, but yes, there is a sizable percentage of people who come from rural parts of Gujarat, Rajasthan, even Madhya Pradesh. But their intent of coming to the fort is slightly different. They are on a pilgrimage tour, and they stop at the museum and then sort of continue. Their engagement with us was of a different kind, and it is difficult to substitute that engagement online. That was a more emotional engagement. And yeah, I would be honest, I mean, we've not been able to substitute that engagement with this audience, but I would be interested in looking at that area. Maybe sort of a lot of them are using smartphones, and they're not on Facebook or view Instagram, but I think they're watching a lot of videos on WhatsApp. So maybe WhatsApp content would be helpful.
Sorry, Ashwin, you can continue.
I think our three priorities are fairly simple. First is, yes, our collections, because Bombay is heading into the monsoon. We have very dramatic climate condition. Ours are purely, artwork based, paintings and drawings and stuff like that. So we know we're going to have conservation nightmares. And we've not been able to access, unfortunately, our entire team lives from as far as Thane, Badlapur. I mean, there's no trains, there's nothing. They can't even get permits to come to the office or the storage. So we're really, really literally living on a prayer here. But so that's our first priority. The second priority for us is to create that brand, impact and for people to know what the Piramal Museum is at this time. Because as far as museums in India go, nobody knows. I mean, actually, we come across many people who say, I don't know what the Piramal Museum is. So brand building and awareness is top priority. And thirdly is to get our teams to become indispensable, so to say, because we're trying to make sure that people whose role could potentially be looked at as non-essential, or why do you need this, or can their task be clubbed to someone else. We're trying to basically make sure that everybody is carrying out very essential tasks and making sure that they're relevant. So yes, a lot of upskilling, a lot of additional work is being handed over, so that we're not, so that we reduce that redundancy of people. So these are our top three priorities at the moment.
Thank you very much. There are some more questions coming in, but we're running out of time. So don't worry, we will send the questions to the panelists and have the answer for you. Thank you again, one and all, and it was great having all the panelists here. And you guys have been a great audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget to, if you want to join in more of these talks, please do send us a mail at info@rereeti.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.